Thank you again for this opportunity to testify. I'm available for any questions Chair Lehner or members of the committee may have.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. We'll start this time with Senator Coley.
Thank you, and let me ask you the same question I asked the other witness. What do you think is a reasonable time frame to impose, if the people who ran the bus into the ditch haven't gotten it out, how much time should we give them to get it out, and what should be the sanction if they don't get it out?
Chair Lehner, Senator Coley, we believe that the framework that's laid out in the legislation, I think, provides an appropriate amount of time for school improvement to happen. And I think, referring back to Dr. Peterson's testimony earlier, improvement's only going to happen when all of the right people are actively engaged. I think there's maybe a premise that I would question, that the people working in the schools, particularly the educators who work every day, have made that choice to serve students as their career, don't want the same thing that parents and everybody else do, and that is the success of students. So you're going to get that improvement when everybody's meaningfully engaged. The benefit of the root cause analysis really gets at, there are a whole variety of issues. Certainly quality of instruction is at the top of the list, but if there are other supports that students need, then we need to make sure that we're doing that. And however long it takes to make sure that students get what they need in order to have success, that's what we need to give them.
Yeah. If they don't fix it within the time frame that you deem fair, what should be the penalty, or what should happen if they don't fix it? Do we let these kids languish in a failing school forever, or do we do something about it? The law already, this bill as proposed would allow the kid to spend half his career, 6 years, in a failing school system, and we're not. There's no repercussions of that. What do we do after, if it doesn't get fixed in the 6? You're supportive of the parameters that are in the bill with the takeover and that?
Chair Lehner, Senator Coley, I think we laid out what some of our structural concerns are with what's in the legislation. I will tell you, one of the advantages of the approach taken here is that it provides for early intervention. And we make sure that we're taking actions collectively so that we don't get to what's being talked about. Any student and their learning is shaped by what's happening in the school, as well as the conditions that they come to school with from their communities. So this idea that, well, if we only come up with a strong enough stick, or a heavy enough hammer that we'll go ahead and punish people into improvement, I think is a mistaken notion. And just look at, again, I know you had hours and hours worth of testimony from lots and lots of people from particularly Youngstown and Lorain who talked about some of the things that just weren't working with this punitive approach to school improvement. This is a much better approach to what's happening. And I believe strongly that because you have people that care about what's going on, that you will have improvement.
Madam Chairman, I appreciate it. I actually heard a lot of testimony from people in Youngstown and Lorain that were saying how the forcing the change is affecting change in the district, and I guess I heard different testimony than what you heard about. But my concern there is what we've said all along, is if we're focused on the education that the child's receiving, and it's not improving, then it's not. I don't think it's a question of punitive. I think it's a question of the wrong people are running the show at some point, that you got to try something different. And you haven't said specifically that you're supportive of the sick and that those provisions in the bill. So I'm asking you, are you supportive of those provisions in the bill that take in and start taking harsher measures to promote change?
Chair Lehner, Senator Coley, we support the improvement framework that's laid out in the bill, and especially that commitment to involving all stakeholders in that process, and the fact that it's going to start early and that we're going to look at a whole range of issues. We also welcome, I think, as an important part of that, the fact that there are resources being provided, that there are people with expertise Again, I reminded of the testimony of the first witness that talked about you keep working at it, and you try, we're talking about complex issues, and this is not the time for a simple solution that just simply says, hey, fire the person at the top and all of a sudden things are going to change, or throw out the collective bargaining agreement and things are going to change. We know that doesn't work. We believe this is a much better approach.
Long you've asked it, and it's been answered. So Senator Maharat.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today and providing your testimony, sir. So I did notice in your testimony, you did note that under the current law, the designated educator member of an academic distress commission does have voting rights. But under this sub-bill, an active teacher member on SIC does not have voting rights, and on the school transformation board, we don't have at least one active teacher member. Can you please elaborate on why you believe that this is not a reasonable accommodation for the students?
Thank you for the question, Chair Lehner, Senator Maharath. First off, on the SIC, we think it's really important to make sure that if you have a SIC in place, that the educator who's there does have voting rights. We hope that that's a change that there's openness to making. We certainly don't want to go backwards from what House Bill 70 provides in that sense. I think as far as the school transformation board, our position on that is that this is a state level policy making body, essentially, that has really important responsibilities for overseeing school improvement. There already is in the legislation an expectation that they have education expertise. We believe that it just would strengthen that body by making sure that at least one of those people is an actual teacher. And I know we're in some conversation about how to maybe improve that. But that perspective, and again, it's been pointed out repeatedly, that the perspective of the frontline educator in terms of understanding the needs of students in the classroom is pretty critical. And I think that would be true both at that state level STB as well as at the district level SIC. Chair Lehner, I think that's something that we probably need to consider or talk about some more. We do have a number of people who are active educators in a variety of roles that may not necessarily require removing somebody from the classroom where they're going to be missing instructional time. But certainly open to different ways to get at that, I think, core principle, and I think we have a shared interest in making sure that we have an educator perspective on that board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I have two questions. The first one is on the topic of mayoral control. We do have mayoral control in Cleveland. Do you believe that that's a right method of trying to help us out of academic distress?
Chair Lehner, Senator Feder, OEA does not support mayoral control as a governance structure for schools.
Okay. Continue? Thank you. The other part, too, is my curiosity, and we're here today because House Bill 70 was a mistake. We know the flaws. We know that they're not improving. Convince us why we need to release these 3 school districts immediately if we're going into a totally new direction with supports, funding, the right method we all believe is going to work. Convince this panel why we must release these 3 school districts immediately when we pass this bill.
Chair Lehner, Senator Feder, thank you for the question. I think the first answer, simple answer, is that particularly in those districts that have been under the House Bill 70 regime, it's not working. And so let's move to an approach that we think has a better chance of working. And we know it's not working for a variety of reasons, but fundamentally because this was imposed on the people in the systems, and you have conflict from the get-go, and there needs to be a better way to bring people together in a collaborative way to actually focus on improvement. Now, one of the things that I think is important is that Youngstown, Lorraine, and East Cleveland do get the kind of supports that are talked about in this legislation. So when we talk about releasing them from academic distress commission and having a dissolution process, that doesn't mean that the state's turning its back on those districts, turning its back on those students. We think there's a really important role to be played there. But we want to have a fair, level playing field. We want to make sure that if there's acknowledgement that that approach wasn't the right one, let's not single those particular districts out while we're giving everybody else in the rest of the state an opportunity to improve under a framework that we believe is a better framework.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Lehner. Scott, you have in here Section 2, return all collective bargaining rights taken away under the current state takeover law under House Bill 70. And I guess you're putting in here effective school improvement actions taken away. I'm not really sure whether they would diminish or not, but I guess the concern that I have with that, and I'm not sure about going ahead and maybe returning wages and benefits, that may not be necessarily the issue. But I just pulled up the City of Columbus's collective bargaining agreements here. There are like 10 different documents, and under the master agreement, which is 121 pages, there are tons of sections here, like under academic freedom, section chapter 200. They've got issues here, association of building councils. You've got election of department chairpersons, length of school day. You just scroll through here, there's lots of different areas of what would be potential management questions that may be needed to correct a failing school that would be included in that. And I guess my concern is if you have to bargain every single one of these, this is a 121 page just on the master agreement alone, every one of these sections, you're probably not even going to get to half of them without causing major issues internally with maybe what is needed versus what could be negotiated. So how would you get through that effort in a timely fashion when, we just had an issue where the City of Columbus almost had a strike over just, the wages and so forth. But if you're going through and there's like hundreds of subsections in this that are included in the current collective bargaining agreement, and you've got 600 and some schools, but this may only be addressing maybe 10, 20 school districts. That's still a lot of stuff that would have to be addressed, even if you exclude like the wages and the benefits. How would you address those types of issues under what you're suggesting?
Chair Lehner, Senator Brunner, I think that's a good question. Since you referenced Columbus, let me just use that as an example to point out, first off, that in their most recently completed negotiations, there was a whole lot more than salary and benefits that was on the table. And in fact, the Columbus Education Association was advocating for issues that may very well come up in a root cause analysis as things that need to be addressed. Things like class size, things like making sure that you have an adequate number of school counselors and nurses in the schools, making sure that there are appropriate mechanisms for dealing with health and safety of students in the schools. That was a lot of what that negotiation involved. I'll also point out that in CEA's contract, they do have a provision that allows for a waiver of contractual provisions if they're at a building level, like say, for example, I know the example of the length of the school day has come up. If there is a recognition that in a particular school that students need more instructional time, there's a mechanism in their contract already that would allow the teachers and the administration in that building to mutually agree to waive that provision of the contract so that they can address that. I think in the broader sense, though, your question raises a really important point about the role of collective bargaining. And I think the first step, and this is where there's a lot of strength in the bill, the first step is let's identify what the root cause issues are. So if the issue is instructional time, then deal with instructional time. If the issue is about appropriate assignment of staff, where they're needed the most, or if the issue is lack of nursing supports for students, then let's focus on those issues. In the normal course of bargaining, the 4117, the collective bargaining law, allows for that. We would certainly be open to conversations to address your question about timeliness of dealing with those issues. If we're in the middle of a contract term and a root cause analysis identifies a particular issue that ought to be addressed, and that would require reopening of the contract, then I think we could talk about a mechanism to allow for a reopener of that portion of the contract so that we can bargain and come to mutual agreement about the best way to address that.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, then that leads to the question, and a lot of what this does is add support and goes to the root cause analysis even before you get to potentially an academic distress commission after 6 years.
Right.
So a lot of this stuff would need to be occurring on an ongoing basis. How would that be addressed? Because a lot of these contracts are for multiple years. I mean, you'd have to be constantly opening up the contract in these particular areas over and over again. And if we've got numerous districts doing this, to me, this just seems like this would be a very cumbersome way of handling potentially some changes that are needed from a support standpoint within these schools. And I guess I've got a concern that this just makes it somewhat more cumbersome, especially when you've got, hundreds of pages of different, documents in a typical collective bargaining agreement. I still find that I'm not sure that you've answered my question completely because I just don't think that I think it's going to be too restrictive in a period where you're trying to turn around a school and make sure things are implemented. And I think some of these definitions, even in this one contract, as I was just going through it, seem to be pretty vague. What does academic freedom mean when a teacher is teaching something? Well, if you've got a high school principal and the performance analysis, the root cause says, well, it's the type of curriculum that you're utilizing, and let's say that even the pedagogy around it isn't proper, that's a major potential change from that section of the collective bargaining agreement. And to me, it seems like that's still going to be a lengthy process to get through to correct.
Chair Lehner, Senator Brenner, I don't think that it's that complicated, quite frankly. For one, when you talk about the length of a contract, 121 pages, whatever it is, probably 110 pages, are completely irrelevant to whatever issue, we might be discussing. You highlight academic freedom. The law of Ohio still says that it's the responsibility of the school board to establish the curriculum, and then we're, as educators, required to teach that curriculum. So it's unlikely that if curriculum alignment comes up as an issue that would even be a collective bargaining issue. You also mentioned, I believe, just the question about the number of districts and the number of contracts that are involved. We're really only talking about this for a very small number of districts that would be in the school improvement process. And if we are truly taking a local approach and we value local control, that an essential element of local control is respecting collective bargaining. We shouldn't be taking a meat axe to a problem that requires a scalpel to solve.
Thank you. We'll move along. Senator Manning and then Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure I have a question because Senator Feder asked a similar one, but I did vote no on accepting the sub-bill, and as not any disrespect for the chair or the vice chair. I know they've worked very hard in this. I've had a lot of conversations with them, and I think there's a lot of good stuff in this. But my biggest reason I voted no on that was because of your first recommendation. I know they've heard from me a lot on this issue, so I appreciate you bringing it up to all of us. And I think it's incredibly important that we dissolve the current ADCs and provide the districts the same report card restart on this state takeover clock that all the other districts would receive under this draft bill. If you want to elaborate any more, we're certainly open to it, but I appreciate you bringing this. If we can get this changed, I think it would improve this bill immensely. Thank you, Chair.
We agree.
Okay. Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. President, for your testimony. As it relates to the Transformational Board, which has statewide jurisdiction, would it be acceptable under the governor's appointments to have one of the members to have the educational representative or representation background like a person like yourself as opposed to an active teacher? Would that be acceptable to you as a member or a representative of teachers as opposed to an active teacher?
Chair Lehner, Senator Sykes, I'm assuming you're not offering me a job right now, but I will just say that I think we can talk through a way to make that work.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's it.
Follow-up?
No,
Senator Terhar, then.
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I know this is an interesting one for you. And this bill is difficult, the sub-bill is difficult because it mixes in apples and oranges. It's got the ADC issue and it's got school transformation. I am not one that likes to be perfect, be the enemy of the good, but obviously both things have to be handled. In your testimony, you enumerated 3 major recommendations. Are those in priority?
Chair Lehner, Senator Terhar, they are all very important. I guess if you're asking which is the most important, I think 1 and 2 clearly are top priorities, and then number 3 we think is, certainly no reason not to do that. But if you really wanted to pin us down, no, we think it's important to make sure that we're addressing the needs of Youngstown, Lorraine, and East Cleveland, and collective bargaining is fundamental importance.
Appreciate as well,
Yeah.
I assume, that they're very different situations. There are schools that went through 3 Fs,
Right.
went through whatever they're going through now, don't seem to be actually topping the charts, and we still have a major issue. So I guess the question is, you must not have much faith in the school transformation board's ability to make good decisions, since the first thing those 3 schools can do under the bill, and it has an emergency clause, which I think was forgotten to be mentioned before, is that as soon as there is a state transformation board in place, we can change those dates and make it as soon as the board's in place. They could make their petition with the basic things they need to do to the school transformation board or the 5 experts to say, this is the best way for you to go, we agree with what you do, or we suggest you modify it to this, which gets them out of that issue anyway.
Chair Lehner, Senator Terhar, I think we're on the same page as far as that goes in terms of a potential approach there. What we don't want to see is that essentially you lay out and say, if the local school board provides, petitions the STB, and there are certain things that have to be met, and we're doing all the things that you're asking us to do. We don't want to see the target moved. We don't want to see the rug pulled out from underneath them. We want there to be a clear, objective means for exit that ensures that all 3 of those districts will have full opportunity to exit academic distress status. And one of the things that is a barrier to that's in this version of the bill is that back-end deadline. Created a window that has to happen between January and June. If we're going to give all of those districts the opportunity to move forward with an improvement plan, then there shouldn't be, you know, a limit in terms of how long it takes for them to do that.
Follows. One of the reasons those were done originally, and that was before the emergency clause, by the way, so those things can be moved, was to require the local school districts, as soon as they know they have a way to get out, to get to work, so that they have to present something to get out. If they choose not to get out for whatever reason, then the School Transformation Board will have another interesting task. But I think the point is that we are trying to get that board to be independent, not politically motivated, an educational board trying to improve education and give them the power to be able to do that. The other thing I think that we also wasn't mentioned in the enumeration of the bill before is we're putting $35 million into this. Even the high-end turnaround in this classroom, folks, spend between $300,000 and $500,000 a classroom. That's a lot of classrooms in this biennium, or what's left of this biennium. By the time this gets passed, you're going to be halfway through the first year of this biennium. So there is a lot they have. They've got a lot of power, and I admit that they do. But it was set up the way it was set up to make them independent from the political pressures and keep them educationally focused. And so I guess there's a little bit of trust that has to come in somewhere as to would the governor prudently put 3 people on there that would have ensured that Ohio becomes a much better state for education. I personally have that trust. Everybody can make their own judgment. And then secondly, on the SIC and the School Transformation Board are very different in the teacher piece. The SIC basically works in the district, and the district has a contract. If the teachers believe they should have a vote on that board, then they should negotiate for that. As you pointed out, they have rights and they have collective bargaining agreement. The School Transformation Board is a different animal with a different purpose, but is under the bill not only authorized but encouraged to bring in specific experts, including teachers and administrators, as advisors to the SIC before they make this, or the State Transformation Board before they make a final decision on things. So I appreciate in black and white you say, oh, I want a contract, one like this. I'm not so sure that that matches up with the first testimony that we said is be flexible, find out the best way to do things, get everybody on board. And that's what we're struggling with, and that struggle, I assume, will probably go past the passage or non-passage of this bill. But I don't believe it's malice aforethought to try to do anything to the unions or collective bargaining.
I don't know if there was a question in there, but
There
a
is.
comment?
The question is, do you believe that the School Transformation Board, as outlined in the bill, is a legitimate vehicle to help improve education in Ohio?
Chair Lehner, Senator Terhar, I think there's tremendous potential for that. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. Regarding just a comment on the SIC and voting rights on the SIC, certainly, and it's true now, if you have a member of a school board who has a conflict of interest when a particular decision has to be made, just like a member of any public body, then there's an expectation that they recuse themselves. We are not suggesting that the voting member of the SIC would, if they are entering into a bargaining agreement, you know, with the teachers, that they would be voting on that. It's really just maintaining the same level of voting rights that ADCs currently have.
Just follow that part of the bill. The reason we didn't is I had to have an odd number on the committee. And on 6 makes you a hung committee, so I got to have 5 somehow. But we'll figure that out. Thank you.
I've just been told that JLEC has an even number of people on the committee, so
Yeah, well,
it's not
that's-
unheard of, apparently.
It's a political animal. We're trying not to be political animals
Right.
here.
Any other? Yeah, odd number? Yeah. I don't see any additional questions. Thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate the work that you've been putting into this, Scott.
Thank you again for the
We really
opportunity.
do.